welcome to Testimony Mountain. I'm so glad to be here with Jessie today and excited for kind of what the Lord is going to take us on this journey. And so, Jessie, if you want to just share a little bit about how people can connect with you or any updates that you have.
Yeah, so you can find me on kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. And I do have some new stuff coming up on there. I encourage people to check out my Unveiling of the System series. And then we also have a new conversation tab where people can watch previous shows that I've done with various different hosts. So it's a wealth of resources. So I encourage you all to check that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Jessie. And I thought today we'd kind of dive into uh, why you do what you do and I do what I do in the sense of sharing publicly some things. You've been a whole lot more public with your affidavits and so on.
Mhm.
Um, but there is a cost to it too. And so, you know, is this a good thing for survivors to do, a bad thing, difficult thing? Um, anyway, if you want to just share any of your experience and how you process through that.
Yeah. I think all the above, I wouldn't necessarily say, I wouldn't define it as a good or a bad thing per se. To kind of start with, what kind of prompted me to come out fully were things that were happening behind the scenes in connection to, I'll say, the good works that the Lord had prepared for me to do. And that's maybe a good category to put it into, is that we know that our testimonies are intricately connected with the good works that the Lord has for us to do.
Mhm.
Um, those works can be difficult, they can be intense, they can be gut-wrenching at times, but um, really that's where the prompting came from, is that the Lord had a plan, and I could either choose to not follow that plan, which seemed like the easiest way. That seemed like the way of peace. That seemed like the way that, I'll just be quiet as I always have been. I'll be silent. I won't, stir the pot. But if I would have chosen that direction, I would have been directly in disobedience to what the Lord was calling me to do according to those good works. I'm not saying that every survivor that doesn't share their story is in disobedience. Don't take that at all. But for me, the Lord brought it to that point. There was a moment where back in 2016, the Lord was getting ready to have me come forward. And one day, as I was, at that time, I was working, helping a homeless shelter, doing processing classes for them. And one of the things that I enjoyed was just getting to know people before I would do the classes. So I would ride the bus when we'd go pick up people and bring them back to the shelter. And so it was on that bus ride, we're heading to go pick people up. And just, I hear that still small voice of the Lord, and he says, you will give your testimony in full. And I knew it wasn't, the watered down version that I had gotten used to giving, because nobody really wanted to hear or listen. Like, I knew that the Lord meant I would be given my testimony. And my first thought was panic. It's like, Lord, you know all the consequences to this. You know what they've threatened, what they're going to do. It's beyond a threat, because for most survivors, if your abuse is connected under the Brotherhood or the Sovereign Military Order, it's not just a threat. They'll do what they threaten. So, all that was coming up, and I did what I think any natural survivor is going to do. I began to bargain with God. I began to plead, okay, Lord, like, Lord, I'm willing. That was my stand. Lord, I'm willing, but, I'm asking that if I do this, that you'll give this special hedge of protection over my family and me. And, because with the threats usually in that are given in your childhood within the system, you know the extent that they'll take it, and your mind automatically goes there every time you think of sharing any of your experiences. That overwhelming fear and panic comes flooding in of everything that they can or will do. Um, and our natural way to combat that is to beg and plead and bargain with God for life, for health, for, good things, for a different outcome. And, so I did that. And it was interesting because the moment I got done, immediately the Lord said to me, "No, you will go forward and you will give your testimony in full." And there was no, what I wanted to hear was, "Oh yeah, my hedge of protection's going to be over you. Nobody's going to harm you or your family. I'm going to give you all this amazing power and authority." What I wanted was to be able to, bring down fire and brimstone. Um, but I didn't have any of those promises. And in that moment was when I had to count the cost. Now, in that, I had different individuals who, prayed for me regularly. None of them knew anything about my testimony or story. So, I reached out to the little old ladies at my sweet little Baptist church. The response I got was, "We can't pray for you."
Mm,
And it wasn't that they didn't want to pray, it's more that they had no idea how to pray. Um, they didn't know that level of warfare, they had no clue. And honestly, were overwhelmed by some of the things I began to ask, for prayer in, because around that same time, right before that, we had gone through another incident where the job that I had had prior, literally, they hired 9 occultists. Those occultists started targeting me one by one, coming into my office, and then it was, by twos, then by threes, then by fours, until all 9 were coming in at one time. And you know, so much so that the other person I worked with, the other chaplain, she came in one morning and she said, "They are targeting you and they're going to take you out. Like, this is not good. Like, they are targeting you." And it's like, "Yep, I know I'm being targeted." And, in that moment, um, she said, "I don't know what God has in store for you, but they don't want you to succeed in that." And all that was before this. So, it's people just don't know how to handle that, what sometimes what the call or the good works that are being released are. So I didn't have the backing of, those who usually would be my prayer backing. Then I had some friends that, were kind of newer friends, but very strong prayer warriors. And in fact, this couple, I really looked up to them a lot. And started to talk to them about, a little bit of the stuff. And they, when I said the Lord is asking me to count the cost, they looked at me and they made me feel like I was making a bad decision.
mm,
They're like, "Well, a good mother would never put her children at risk. A good mother would, why would you ever even do that, knowing that they could harm your children? It's better just to be silent." And really what the Lord did with that encounter was he put the cost in different terms. And the terms were, Am I willing? Let's say I go through all of this, let's say worst case scenarios, I lose everything. Am I willing to do that if only one child, if only for one child out of the system, am I willing to lay everything on the line? And what it came down to was that, you know, I couldn't walk away from just one. And I knew that God in his grace would not put me in that situation, worst case scenario, only to bring one out. But it's like, okay, Lord, I know this is going to be bigger. I know that, there's going to be many, and how can I not? There's so many that don't have a voice. There's so many that it's not known where they're at. They don't have anybody to help them. There is no one else. There is no one else that knows the things that I know that would help, therefore I have to put everything on the line. And it's a hard thing because it does come, it's not just like you have a battle in that moment. The entire time, um, whether it's preparation, whether it's getting ready to share your testimony, whether it's working through memories, um, whether it's the first time you're speaking out, or maybe you're really starting to get out and share with others some of your experiences. The entire time is intense and can be filled with warfare. The retaliation for every time you speak, um, can be a lot and can come in all different forms, whether that's attacks on your health, attacks on your finances, attack on your property, your belongings, where you'll have your fridge quits, your AC quits, your washing machine quits, all in the same day, and all because you decided to tell on a new platform. And so it's a constant battle and constant intensity, and with that, a constant offering and sacrifice to the Lord. Each time you're doing it, it's a Lord, not my will, but yours be done. And that place of learning to live in that place of constant surrender is difficult. And there are moments where you're like, heck no, like, I don't want to, I don't want to. And there's going to be moments you get like that where it's so intense, there's so much, and you're just like, Lord, I don't want to, and how do you get through that? Again, you have to come to that place of surrender. Lord, all right, not my will, but yours be done. And really, it's that place where you learn that the Lord, it's not about you. You're not the one carrying the good works that he wants to release. It's his work. And he's giving you an honored position, even though as difficult as it is, because our testimonies are so personal, our abuse is so personal. But yet there's an honor. The Lord gives us the chance to do something with it. The chance, are we going to use that, what happened to us? Are we going to do nothing with it? And if we choose to do nothing, what do we lose in that? All of the things, even the things that the enemy means for evil, God means for our good. So with that potential, we have to understand that everything that has happened to us has that potential to either be used for evil or to be used for good. And every day is that constant choice. In which direction am I choosing to steward what has happened to me? Do I allow the enemy to continue to use it for evil, or am I going to allow the Lord to use it for good, not just my good, but when we make that choice, there's a double portion, there's a double blessing that comes because not only are we blessed in that, but we bless so many other people's lives through that. And when we learn to lay everything of our own will down and come to that place of surrender, um, we learn that we don't lose ourselves. We don't lose ourselves. In fact, we find the fulfillment. We find something greater beyond ourselves that um, is very fulfilling and satisfying in, in the good work. And find that that's the fullness of who we are. That's the beauty about us that the Lord is displaying through that good work. And, you know, there has to be a getting ourselves out of the way to allow the Lord to display that beauty of who we are in the fullness of who we are. So, um, I came to love that more than just looking at myself or what I want. Um, it's like, okay, Lord, if this is your work and, I can trust that you're going to do something amazing with it, no matter what the cost, I'm willing to pay that cost, um, even unto death, which is the hardest part, because that's the truth for the majority of us is that, our testimonies come with that price.
So appreciate what you're sharing, Jessie. And I've had a little bit of this, not as much as you have, but I know when I first, launched Testimony Mountain, probably many of you haven't gone back and listened to the original why I started this, but just in short, we had two suicides that were connected to our community or close to our community, and I was really brokenhearted by it because I knew that most likely these were survivors that just got overwhelmed with life and couldn't
Mhm.
face it. Um, and knowing that true Jesus is the only way, and He has a way through our deepest pain. And so when I was inquiring to the Lord about it, he showed me this mountain, and a group of us were on the top of the mountain, and we were releasing our testimony in different ways, writing, speaking.
Mhm.
And it was like this reverberation was happening that I knew was affecting other people, many other people. And so it was like, wow, I want to do that.
Mhm.
Um, but like you, I had to count the cost and did some bargaining because it was like, okay, I'll do this if you cover this and make sure that none of my family members will ever see this.
Right. But if you, all those terms are terms we throw in there.
Yeah, and he was like, no, can you trust me to either cover it and or if I allow it, them to see it, that I will see you through whatever the consequences are. And it was hard, and
Yeah.
honestly, there's been many times, in the course of it that I've considered shutting it down because it was like, I just can't
Mhm.
do this. And I was hoping a lot more, survivors would come forward to share their testimonies, and we haven't had as much of that. Um, because of what I do, I don't have a lot of time to go, ask people for testimonies and all of that
Mhm.
as much. Um, and so, sometimes I get discouraged about it and think, what's the use of this?
Yeah.
um, but yet the Lord keeps saying, just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Mhm.
And it's not easy to share. Sometimes I just get in front of the camera and push record and go, okay, Lord, whatever comes out of my mouth.
Right.
And maybe sometimes that's foolishness. I don't know. Some people are like, are you putting yourself and your community in risk, to do what you're doing? And yet, to me, the more and more we bring everything into the light of God's love, that is where the healing is.
Yeah.
And so, again, each person has a different calling. And so, no judgment for those who aren't ready to or don't. We understand that. Um, but I know for me, I want to see every bit of my trauma turned
Hmm.
into the triumph of their love. I do not want
Yeah.
the enemy or the cult system to win. And I want to do everything I can with all that I am to see that fulfilled. And I am believing for that. I'm believing that there will be a mass exodus from the cult system. I don't know how and how all that's going to happen, but I believe it's on God's heart.
Yeah.
And that each testimony that goes out is that reverberation uh,
Hmm.
that is reaching and having an impact to the very, you know, core of the cult system. And so we
Yeah.
keep moving on.
And I think that's a good reality that you bring out, but something to definitely overcome because, how the enemy works and operates in is, trying to get force compliance. And what you brought out was that, you know, when we step out with our testimonies, a lot of times the enemy will attack those around us in order to try to get us to come under compliance. Um, and or what are some ways you have found to navigate that?
For me, it's keeping set before me the joy set before, you know, of
Mhm.
that triumph of their love, of restoration. Because if I just look at, you know, my life, the memories that are surfacing, the different things that are happening to those around me, my normal natural tendency is, just take me out of the equation. If I'm not
Mhm.
in the equation, then they're not going to threaten those I love. And
Right.
yet, that isn't the solution.
Hmm.
They will win, with that. And they just keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so to me, I've come down to the bottom line is believing that God is bigger than the cult system, is more powerful, and
Hmm.
he does have a way through. And I have to hang on to that with all that I am and to
Hmm.
believe that he does work all things for good, even the way I was used in the system, And
Yeah.
so it's hard for survivors to understand that a lot of times we just look at the victim side of it, all the things that were done to us. But in
Mm.
at least more the Illuminati and Jesuit, um, we were trained, from infancy to be perpetrators.
Hmm.
And so that is a way of life that we have to face. And it is really, really, really difficult to face that
Hmm.
as memories come. And so it's easy to just go, this isn't worth it. I can't do this anymore and all of
Yeah.
that. But I have to believe in God. Um,
Hmm.
so
Yep. And I think too, it's a great time, like rather than the backing down or the being afraid, um, rather than succumbing to what others are throwing at you, use it as an opportunity to equip, to build up. Often I think of that retaliation as, weapons that are being formed. What weapons is the enemy forming against me, against those that I love? What really needs to be safeguarded is our testimony and our voice, because, in scripture, that's how we overcome the evil one, is by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. So the very thing that is our greatest weapon is what the enemy is trying to get us not to use. Um, so, when you think about it that way, we know that, a couple things. One, scripture talks about, that no weapon formed against you will prosper. So are we allowing those weapons that are being formed to prosper, or other people in our lives allowing those weapons to prosper? If so, what needs to be shored up? What do we need to teach or train or suggest, that maybe it's that teaching moment. The other thing is, scripture tells us that we have weapons of divine warfare that are not of this world. So is there something, in those classifications of divine weapons of warfare that the Lord is wanting us to teach others how to use, how to overcome? So those are some things that I'll kind of bring into it when I have those attacks, like if you would stop, we all wouldn't be getting that attack either. And it's like, well, why is the Lord allowing the attack?
Yeah.
You know, Either we need to step up and not allow this weapon to prosper, or maybe he's wanting us to learn about our divine weapons that are not of this world. And are we applying those? Are we learning how to use those in these times?
Yeah, that's so good. And for me, again, I have to believe that I am always held safe in God's hands. And what he allows, he is allowing for me to be aware of those places
Hmm.
that are vulnerable, particularly for a survivor of pretty intense things. We have layers and layers and layers
Yeah.
of gateways and portals and things that, you know, a lot of the church would be just like, oh, just have a deliverance session and it's all over. And it's like, no, it's layered in, and it's the
Hmm.
mercy of the Lord to deal with it layer by layer.
Yeah.
And that he covers us in the meantime, but he does allow some access so that we become aware of what needs to be dealt with. And sometimes that's hard, to go, I have a memory of something that happened, uh,
Hmm.
and God, it doesn't feel like you were there. And being able to have that conversation with him,
Yeah. Yeah.
and, he's said, at least for me, there's a line that they can't cross. And I have to keep believing that,
Yeah.
even in the midst of the challenges. So,
Yeah. And there is, I know that's the hardest, you know, we all go through those times where, we do ask that question, why were you not there? But I want to share maybe just a brief part about something that had happened to me later that really showed that the Lord does put boundaries on things according to his will. I had, it's a period of my life where I was working with youth. Long story short, I ended up having to try to go after one of the youth. They had run away. And this had been somebody, you know, just seemed like a very gentle person, never had been aggressive at all. Next thing I know, I ended up in this fight with them, and the young man was assaulting me, and in that, the Lord allowed me to hold my own through that for 10 minutes. We were, wrestling on the ground, and it came towards the end of that 10 minutes, I heard the Lord say, enough. And all of a sudden, my coworker came driving down the driveway because we had been at the end of this long driveway, and the Lord gave that out that I needed out of that situation. So the Lord does, that's a word I often remember. There comes a point where the Lord says, whatever the attack is, enough. And, the enemy can come no farther in that. Um, so very true. Yeah.
yeah. So, what prompted you to do the affidavits? If you can share, I'm just curious.
I was asked to do those, to put everything into the writing, and to, begin to bring that things forward in the judicial system. I'll put it that way.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Because I've heard of other survivors, starting to take some of those steps. And, it's a pretty big step to put it out there publicly and in a legal way. So,
yeah, yeah, absolutely it is. And it's hard because I think there's so many challenges in that with the judicial system. You it definitely doesn't mean the fight is over. Some of the things I've brought out is how difficult it is for survivors, one, to report, two, to find due process. How do you get through that? And, for me, it started with, putting things into the affidavit form. Um, you know, I there's some different things on that. For me, I didn't have anyone who was saying this is how it has to be done. And in that, there was a freedom for me because it's like what I wanted was just for my voice to be heard. I wanted people to understand what were the criminal things that I had experienced and witnessed, both to myself and other children, and what were my memories, my experiences. And, I wanted my voice to be heard. So that's the way I did it. I didn't, I chose how to present, how to put things in a way that worked for me and for the telling of my story. And I think that that's where survivors kind of it can be a challenge for many of us because we think that there has to be a set format, that it has to, there has to be chronological order, there has to be, um, things that are set in stone before you can say anything. And, that's not the case. You can simply put your words, your experience, what happened to you on paper and let your voice be heard. um I had another survivor who did a really presented things a really great way. They did their testimony kind of like a resume,
Mhm.
um and where they would put like the events, the things that happened, the people involved, stuff like that. um so there's different creative ways you can find to present it. And, I got to the point where pretty much I demanded, no, my voice is going to be heard. It's my voice. I don't have to tell it in a way that's going to make somebody else happy because a lot of the confinements that they put in the legal system are not even appropriate to a survivor's testimony. And I've brought that out. It's like things are not black and white in this world, nor are there set rules. Um, and that some of the challenges for survivors is how do you even begin to describe things that happen between a physical and a spiritual world? There's things that do not even apply to the physical world in your experiences. And you should have the right to communicate that if that's part of your abuse.
Mhm.
The other thing is, it's like they want to set things in their approved terms, where let's just say like, torture or physical abuse, emotional abuse. Um, and then just name in generality what happened. You were abused. Well, that doesn't tell anybody diddly squat about what happened to me. So I exert my right to share about my abuse, and I'm going to tell you what happened to me. And it's not black and white, it's pretty complicated. And if I had to deal with this mess as a kid, if I had to deal with this mess and figuring out how to put it into words, then you can deal with my words and the mess that it is and understand how complicated it was. Um, and the legal system wants to do many of us an injustice in that.
Mhm.
Um, they want us to be afraid. They want us to not come forward. Why? Because, at moments, the, the system, which the judicial system is under the overall system, They want to protect their circle groups. They want to protect their higher level members. They want to protect what's really happening at a quadrant and a regional level and how the system is operating in that quadrant or region. So they'll sometimes allow survivors to go against one or two people, claiming things like sexual abuse or things like that. But outside of that, it's really limited. And it's like, what do I want to be the outcome? Like, why am I going to all lengths to tell my story? So that's where I got into my Congress petitions, and I encourage people. You can find those on timothycharleshomeseth.com. But I have two Congress petitions, and if you type in Congress petition, you'll see both come up. The first is more of the general one, speaking, kind of outlining the things that I went through. The second is more focused on the state of Wyoming and, the stuff that happened there. But they're really great frameworks um, for different ways, different things that you can bring out. What I started highlighting were the crimes that were occurring to me, both in the reporting and the due process fields. Um, and, how complicated it was. And because of that, it also then allowed me to bring out that, hey, there are problems in our executive, legislative, and judicial system processes. It should not be this difficult for someone to report criminal activity, nor should it be, this difficult to have due process. These are some of our rights that are foundational to our country, our constitutional right that we have even our state constitutions, it is considered a civil duty to report criminal activity. So when I'm giving my testimony, when I'm sharing about the crimes that I experienced or witnessed, I'm exercising my civil duty. That's a good thing. It should be celebrated. It should be honored. You know, why is it not? Why am I being treated like a criminal for doing so? And we have to break that mindset because everything within that system, is meant to criminalize the victim. And we got to learn to break free from that to say, you know what? I'm going to stand in what I know to be my rights. And that's part of the maturing, um, that we're not victims anymore. There's a re-victimization that happens a lot in the learning to work through our memories and the beginning to tell our stories. But when we set that aside, we realize that we're not the victims, that we are acting courageously. We are acting according to our rights. And we're going to fight for those rights. We're not going to allow anybody to continue to take them away from us because that's what they did to us as children. They
Mhm.
took away and suppressed our rights. Um, so that's the next level, is realizing that we have the right and we can exercise those rights. And we don't have to follow the rules, the regulations. Um, we have authority, we have standing, and we can bring our testimony in its fullness and respectfully and say, no, I'm not going to receive your feedback that you've given to me. I'm not going to receive your decline to hear my voice. I have something important to say, and it is your job, your oath, your position requires that you listen, that you look, that you do your job and investigate. What I'm bringing forward, I'm giving you actionable evidence. And, it's your job to go look. And if you're not going to do your job, I'm going to hold you to account for that. And there's an empowering in that all of us have that, now we can turn around and take the things that have happened to us and we can be those who hold to account. Um, which is it's not the easiest road.
Mhm. Yeah. I
No.
appreciate you sharing all that. I think for, some of us as survivors, some of the challenges of reporting, I can think of three kind of right off. One is because we were trained to be perpetrators, we often were involved in criminal activity too. So
Mhm.
the fear of if we, you know, point out this stuff, it may implicate us as well.
Yeah.
For a lot of us, it was international. So how do we deal with that? And then a lot of times it's elites and,
Mhm.
the fear of what happens if we disclose. So I don't know if you
Yeah.
want to address any of that.
And I think that's some of the challenges that I've brought out is the complications to the situations. There's a forced element to it, um, where initially you don't have a choice. It's your life or someone else's, and who naturally is going to choose someone else's when it comes down to that. Yet you have, as children, your natural desire is to be good, to save, to protect. Yet, there comes moments where you realize you can't. And, um, how do you begin to communicate those things? And that's things, where precedence needs to be set, legislation needs to be set, understanding or training, so that when or those who are receiving the reports understand those complications and can put it into context. Those are some of the things that need to be shifted in both the reporting and the due process. Um, that breaks the power of the system that they've had over, the survivors and the kind of that circle group mentality, your brotherhood mentality. Your silence protects others. Your non-silence also incriminates yourself. How do you get past that? There has to be shifts in the legislation. There has to be shifts in those who are receiving the reports to be able to document, understand those things, understand how it works. Um, in that I've also brought out a lot too that there isn't appropriate honor. For many survivors, like some of the situations, there are just some outright, um, black and white. Did you participate? Yes. Were you there when this happened? Yes. There's no way around that. But then there's times where it's like, it's not so black and white, um, where the judicial system will incriminate because just, the answer to those two questions. You were there, you were participating, therefore you're guilty too. But what they don't take into account is all that went around that. How many times did you refuse to participate? How many times did you attempt to make that scenario different? None of that's brought in. None of that is accounted to you as honorable acts, you know, and it should be. All of that should be brought in. And when all of that's brought in, you see that most of the time, the situations that survivors find themselves in, really there should be honor accounted to that person because they went to all extent to make things different, to not comply, things like that. And our judicial systems are not built that way
Yeah.
to receive that or to bring that into account. Um, you know, and that's a disservice.
Yeah.
It allows those who really are perpetrators to walk away, and it allows the victimization of the victim to continue. Now beyond just being a victim, now you're also a criminal because you told. And that's the way that they keep those who tell under control.
Yeah. It's not easy at all to walk out this journey. And again, it's a personal decision that each person needs to know before the Lord, whether
Yeah.
to um, go the legal route and try to report. Is there any international uh, appeal criminal court that people can take some of these to when it's international?
I think um you know I think that things are being revamped right now,
Mhm.
so that would maybe be where I put it. And I think very soon we're going to see things shifted, avenues changed. We have a lot of executive orders that have been going out now that are paving that way. One being the time limits for reporting criminal activity for survivors is lifted. So, um, there isn't a worry on that. You will be able to report no matter how long ago those crimes happened. What I would like to see happen, is that there needs to be that interface between the United States and internationally. There needs to be something specific in dealing with the Brotherhood and the sovereign military, um, because of the connections with everything being international with that. Um, so I'm hoping to see things like that come into play here soon, where there will be a way that survivors or victims can report and can have due process.
Really good.
Yeah,
Praying for that. Our ultimate justice comes from the true Lord Jesus. But I
yeah,
do think there is a part in the earthly realm that, we can do what we can. It's hard because a lot of the judicial system is infiltrated. And so, again, a lot of fears that, reporting is just going to be, you know, skewed or turned back on us or, a
hmm,
number of different things. Um, but we get to be obedient to whatever, the Lord is speaking to each one of us.
yeah,
Um, I think one of the things that does grieve me though is sometimes there's a sensationalistic type of thing in some reporting or sharing, testimony in a way that emphasizes the victimhood. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but that can be difficult too.
I'm not sure if can you give some examples of that, of what you're thinking or?
Well, just sometimes I've seen testimonies that it feels like um, the whole focus is to sensationalize, to magnify what the enemy is doing, um, instead of being able to see what God is doing. And
Mhm.
I know again, not everybody who reports is a Christian at all, and so that may
Yeah,
be their
that's true.
journey. Um, but I think that is a key point. Is when I share things publicly, I don't want it to be exalting the enemy or looking like, he has more power than our true and living God.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, you know.
but I think the more we do get out, the better. So it's kind of that, you know, um,
Yeah.
trusting the Lord to give us the words and the right frequency that's going to have a power to affect and not just be a um, sensationalization or um, kind of a psyop where it's taking attention from where it needs to be,
Mhm.
that type of thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It's hard when um I think you get individuals too that they are wanting that sensationalism, and that's the whole purpose, and they have no intent of um bringing their testimony into the courts or doing affidavits or things like that. um so it's important to think about what's the outcome, why are you doing what you're doing. For me, it went beyond myself. I realized there's issues with reporting. I realized there's issues with the due process. How do you get those things changed? Right? And there's only one way to get it changed. You have to, do certain things. So, um, that's the avenues that I took to help to set that precedence, so that survivors in the future will know what needs to be done. Um, so things are in place so they can bring their testimony forward and have due process and not have to go through all the endless dead ends that go nowhere. Um, I think too, like when you get to those who are publicly speaking out, there's two things with that. Um, that can be an avenue both where you feel like there's more danger, you're getting more retaliation, more attacks, more harassments because you are speaking out. So it can have that impact, but also it can be a safeguard too. Um, you
yeah,
know, when your testimony's out publicly, there's a safeguard in that, that, the system, especially as if you're spreading wide, um, you know, d- once it's out, it's out, and the enemy can't stop that. So there can be a safeguard in that as well. So I do encourage survivors to start telling their story, to do so on platforms because, um, you know, there can be a safeguard in that. Yet the challenge in that is that you do get those sensationalizing platforms. Um, you know, so you want to be leery because not every platform that gives survivors a voice is a good platform. This one is a great one. How do you know those that are the good platforms? It's those that, they're they're receiving. That was a word that the Lord gave me back when I started speaking on even platforms that weren't Christian. I do encourage, survivors, if they are Christian, to start on those platforms because, you're going to get a lot of the encouraging, the building up in Christ. I was called to go beyond that, outside of that, because the Lord was wanting to specifically reach survivors that were not believers. Um, and the Lord had said to me, go where you're received, meaning that they allowed me to pray, they allowed me to share my testimony in whatever way. They allowed me to speak about God, about my relationship with God, um, and didn't hinder that. So the Lord told me to go where I was received. Um, but you still have to really be in prayer and be careful because there are, I'll just say, the fake communities. You get the fake survivor communities that, the purpose, it's a psyop, and they're bringing people on to share their testimony so they can gather information. And then they're going to take that and throttle you with it in every single way that they can after you've been on those platforms. So that's just the reality, and you have to be careful of that.
yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. And what if, like in my case, I don't yet have a full story. And so, on Testimony Mountain, I'm sharing bits and pieces as I'm walking out my journey. but a lot of times people feel like, well, I don't have all the pieces in place. I don't have all the confirmation. So, maybe I'm just making this up, all of those kinds of things. What would you say to them?
Yeah, that I would just, maybe work through it privately for that, unless there's something like I think it's okay to present it in that way that, hey, I have a surfacing memory. I'm unsure about some of this, but I'm just sharing what came to mind
Mhm.
and I'm processing.
Yeah,
And, that raw processing is okay. And it's okay to, state it that way, that that's what this is. I think that's where, you get some of the other, platforms or channels where survivors can come on and they can be in that state where they're just processing, but then people will then take it and use that against them later and say, oh, look, they're saying something different now, or, you know, and I think if you clarify that's what you're doing, I think that's good. But, I guess that would be what I want to safeguard is that if you're not sure or you have questions, um, it's okay to be in that place of wrestling before you come forward with it. Um, but if you are feeling that you're supposed to come forward with it, then come forward with it and trust that the Lord's going to be there to be with you through that, and he'll provide the clarity and the understanding and the revelation when you need it.
that's really good.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we'll wrap up shortly here. Any last thoughts on this topic, Jesse?
No, good conversation
Good.
today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing and being on. I really appreciate it, Jesse. And just want to honor all of you survivors out there. I hope this is encouraging to you. And um, as you walk this out, feel free to reach out to me or to Jesse if you have questions, thoughts, comments, if you want to share. This platform is open to that. And just want you to know that you're not alone, and that, the Lord is with you no matter what. And so I just bless you today, and we'll see you next time on Testimony Mountain.